everybody, and welcome to the 200th episode of The Extra Shift. I am Santa Chris here with Brendan. How are we going?
Good. How's it going? Yeah, we made it. 200 episodes. Pretty impressive. Honestly, technically, we've done a few more because there was a couple that weren't like technically numbered.
Specials.
Yeah, but it's we've been doing this for a while. It's been a lot of fun. So thanks anyone who's kind of stuck around with us from the start. We usually do a bit of a kind of number gag around like the final numbers of the episode, but there really isn't a heap of like zeros and double zeros. There's literally like three. So I feel like, I can include myself in there. When I played inline hockey, I also played with double zero. So and I wasn't a goalie. So
I mean, what I do like about this, and I always like to look for general managers and coaches. I mean, John Davidson.
Yeah.
So, and Marty Biron.
That's Marty Biron is the obvious one. But that's pretty much it. And I think was Goldberg in like the Mighty Ducks movie? Did he wear double zero? Is that why everyone?
No, I think Goldberg wore double zero.
Yeah.
I had to wait for when you said Goldberg, I'm like, the wrestler, and they're like, Mighty Ducks.
Yeah.
Real Goldberg.
Real Goldberg, that's right.
Real Goldberg. By the way, for people who are watching, not listening, I do have a Santa beard on at the moment. It's coming off in a minute because it's ridiculous. But, I know the effect. I mean, this is a glimpse into the future, I think.
It's very impressive.
I'm terrified by the concept. So we're going to take that off because it's horrific.
Yeah, that looks awful. I'm sweating just watching you.
Yeah, I'll leave the hat on for now, although that'll probably come off about halfway through the episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, so it's episode 200. And thank you, as Brendan said before. And of course, what would it be without how are you going to do that hockey call, this time with the ho-ho-ho on it? Thank you very much to my darling wife. So yeah, it is episode 200. Thank you very much for everyone who's watched an episode, listened to an episode, given us feedback on an episode, whether it be fantastic or to tell us that we're horrible individuals. Either or, don't really mind.
Yeah, it's all good. I mean, we just do this for fun, really. So it's not.
Yeah, I greatly enjoy when people tell us that we don't know what we're doing, but that's largely because it often comes back to bite the person on the butt. Like the number of people that told us that Ryan Reeves was a good contract, things like that. That's always something. I'm taking the hat off already. It's done. You
made it almost 3 minutes, Chris.
I made it almost 3 minutes, and I've got to get rid of the whole thing because it's itchy. It's itchy too. It's an itchy.
Yeah, that looks awful.
It was horrible. So anyway, obviously 200 episodes in, and again we do this largely again because it's a lot of fun, as Brendan said, and we get to bounce ideas off, and we sort of get a lot of good conversation going. So
thanks to Shannon for saying that we're not both horrible. I'm refusing to ask for clarification on that because it might mean one of us is horrible, and I prefer
to go the principal in season 3 Buffy. You're both more or less adequate.
Fair.
Which is always my favorite speech of any description. Hello to the graduating class. You will prove yourself more or less adequate. That's of course before he ascends and eats half the class. Anyway, let's get into episode 200. We've got some stuff to talk about. We'll go generally around as well. And then we're going to do a little bit at the end where we're going to ask, what do teams want under their Christmas tree? Now, remember as well, one of the things you have to remember at the moment is we're just entering roster freeze. So rosters are frozen for the Christmas New Year period. So you can't decide to be really nasty to someone and trade them out of town on the 24th of December. Make them have to move. You can't do that. So we are in the middle of a roster freeze right now, but of course that will then pick up early in the new year. So with that in mind, you have a trade to announce. I think you're going to want to hear it. Actually, not really. They're pretty boring.
I think this first one is honestly somewhat substantial.
It's probably the most. It's the most substantial one there, and we'll talk about the St. Louis one later because the name is substantial, but I don't think the trade was. No. The Kraken acquired Thomas Tatar from Colorado for a 2024 fifth round pick. Now,
it's interesting. I think Tatar wasn't necessarily working out in Colorado. I think people looked at that and saw okay, well, here's
Colorado's
top 6 winger.
Weird. It's a weird destination for players to go.
Yeah, I don't think for some reason, I just don't think it worked out for him in that location so far. Obviously, it's a very small sample size,
Yeah.
but so far he's found himself on the top line with Matty Beniers, who's having a struggling kind of sophomore season, but filling out that line with Beniers and Eberle, and they've got back on the scoreboard. Obviously very small sample at this point in time, but it would be nice if Tatar found a fit there, and I think that probably that's a good team for him in terms of like depth, because Seattle kind of roll their lines regardless of which line's the first, which line's the third, all that kind of thing. And I think that realistically, he kind of fits into that depth in terms of the players, especially with McCann out and the amount of injuries and inconsistency and stuff that they've had. I think that makes a lot of sense for them for a fifth. Why not?
The thing, the thing for me with Thomas Tatar that I find interesting is that I still kind of think of him as a Red Wing, but he's bounced all over the damn league. Like since that Golden Knights trade, which at the time the Golden Knights were traveling really well, and then that trade was one of the things that season that everyone went, well, that kind of fell apart. So after that, he was Vegas, then Montreal, then New Jersey, then Colorado, then Seattle.
Yeah.
And like it's been really interesting that like he's not stuck. Like he seems to do 2 seasons. Well, 3 in Montreal, but like one of them was sort of a 50 season, sort of half a season, which was the lockout, obviously. Another lockout, the COVID season. But he kind of didn't perform brilliantly in Montreal. Devils, he was 30 points with 48 points. So his best career return was 61, in his second season in Montreal. I think it's good for Seattle because I think that Seattle, it hasn't quite. Who would have thunk it? The Magic hasn't quite worked in Seattle the way it worked last year. It's just, it hasn't looked as good. It hasn't looked as fluid. It's looked a lot more like we thought it would last year. It's really weird. Seattle, a lot of the time this year, again, they look like they don't really know each other on the ice. They're still getting used to each other. And like last year, it looked like they'd played together for years. This year, it looks like they've never met. And so that's a confusing thing in Seattle. So I think having a veteran presence like Tatar is a good thing. I'm more intrigued by, as I've sort of indicated before, we've said this a few times now about a few players since, they've been good. Yeah, they've been good. But how often have we said the phrase, it didn't quite work for them in Colorado? A lot of players that are brought into that system don't work. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, I think that in a way, I think that they've struggled to replace certain pieces that maybe were, maligned at the time. Like, you think about the success that Nazem Kadri had after leaving the Leafs and joining Colorado, and kind of, obviously he had that, those issues in the playoffs with suspensions and doing stupid shit. But they've just been really unable to replace him in terms of depth since then. They've tried with, Ryan Johansson this season. They, previously tried other people in that role. And they're just kind of, bouncing a whole bunch of people around their lineup. I'm looking at the Colorado, forward group at the moment. I don't know who the fuck half these guys are. I mean, I think part of it obviously is the fact that they've got a whole bunch of injuries again. Lehkonen is out, and Cogliano, a bunch of guys that they were kind of relying on for veteran kind of presence. Obviously, Landeskog maybe won't play again. They're not really kind of the shining example of who they were at one point in time.
I'd completely forgotten that Joel Kiviranta there.
Yeah.
I absolutely, completely forgot the Joel Kiviranta.
I mean, look, everyone kind of forgot about Kiviranta after the Dallas playoff run, to be fair. But did you see, while we're talking about Colorado, did you see the Devon Toews interview?
No, I didn't.
Okay, so I mean, the gist of it basically, after a kind of, a loss to the Blackhawks, they, he was pretty frustrated talking to a beat writer, and essentially kind of sold out his team. He more or less, like, the gist of it. Hello, this is one of my cats. He's kind of decided to come in. Basically, said there's a bunch of guys on this team who think that they're playing well, but actually aren't. And like we've essentially said, this league, you can't really, half-ass it. You can't really take, have a bad game, and maybe there's 14 guys on these 20 that are trying, and there's a few people phoning, essentially, like, not in those words, but effectively that was kind of his message, and essentially said, there's a bunch of guys that think they're playing well that maybe aren't, and I think that's probably the most that we've seen an NHL player say bad about his team in a long time.
Yeah, it's a fascinating sort of. They weren't a team that I expected to go. They won their cup, and they're kind of going to cruise it a little bit. You're like, okay, Colorado's finally here. And I'm not saying they're cruising it, because they're a really, really, really good team, and I think we both tipped them to do. I think I wanted to tip them to win again. I can't remember. I think I did.
I think I tipped them to be in the cup final. Or
yeah. I don't know what's going on there. Like, they started off fine, and I know they've had some injuries.
Look, I think actually that there's some good points that Taves made that have kind of been, like, bubbling around my head for a little while this season. And I think that he's right that you really can't take a night off in this league anymore. Like, as much as we've talked about, like, none of the teams are, like, obvious standouts as, like, this is the team to beat, this is a really good team. I also don't think that, including some of the worst teams in the league, that anyone is particularly that bad. Like, there's such parity on any particular night that you maybe in previous seasons could have gotten away with being like, oh, I'm not 100% tonight or whatever. I'll just kind of, not go as hard or whatever. And I've just seen so many teams just kind of, look like world beaters one night and then just not really turn up the next night and then get completely blown out. And I just think that maybe the league can't really, has just gotten so good as a general standard that you just can't do that anymore. I know that they were talking about recently on the Hockey PDO cast, they were talking about talking to a goalie that I can't remember exactly who it was, but a veteran goalie saying that you used to be able to have a B game. Sometimes you didn't have your A game that night. You try to put together a B game or whatever, and that's the night that now you try and do that and they'll hang 8 on you, and it's just you can't get away with it anymore.
I think that's a deeper point there. I think that's something that we saw, with San Jose after they got thumped twice.
Yeah.
And I think teams decided they were going to go into San Jose and have a bit of an easy, quiet night.
Yeah.
And what it did was gave the Sharks some confidence. And they got over that hump. And the next thing, they started rattling off some wins simply because, the confidence came back because teams came in there and decided to cruise. Conversely, if you look at, some of the teams where they've had their dips, it just feels like they've gone, we'll back off for a little bit now.
Yeah.
And like we saw that, we've seen that with a couple of teams this year. Maybe that's the secret because we've all been trying to work out why Boston, which is a team that shouldn't do anything, keeps doing something. And maybe the trick with Boston is they just refuse point blank to have a night off.
Yeah.
They just literally...
Yeah, I think there's an element of that for some teams. They just have a culture that is just not, allowed. And I think maybe that's something to do with the success of like a team like Philadelphia this year. Like you've got that kind of Tortorella effect of like, he's not going to put up with people taking a night off or whatever. They've got nothing to lose, so they may as well go out there and fight hard every night. And yeah, I don't know. I think it's interesting that and there are no teams really that are like blatantly tanking in a really obvious way. Like even the teams that are bad and we knew were going to be bad, at least tried to surround their players with like, decent, like even the Blackhawks, they tried to get Taylor Hall, they tried to put in Corey Perry, they tried to have like, guys there so they weren't an embarrassment to the league. Obviously, that didn't work out for them, and most of those guys are gone for injuries and for other reasons and so forth. But no one was actively going, I'm going to intentionally put the worst team in the league in a complete embarrassment out on the ice and try to lose every night. Everyone's trying to win.
And that is, I think, a difference. One of the things that we have seen, and we can do the whole, we can do the whole thing too, where we talk about that. Well, what we've learned over 200 episodes, I think that's one thing we've seen change, is that it's just you can't be.
There used to be haves and have-nots, and I think that there's a lot of mushy middle now.
Yeah, there's a lot of we used to have one or two teams that would surprise and do well, and one or two teams that are you'd expect to do quite well and drop off. This year, if you look at the NHL standings, there's a couple of teams you expected to do well who are doing well, and there's a couple of teams that are just absolutely underperforming massively, and you expected a lot better out of them. And it's a really, and there's a couple of teams who there was no hope in hell.
Yeah, and there is a theme, I think, obviously, for those teams that are underperforming. A lot of those are the older teams, and that's probably an aspect of not being able to have a B night. There's a handful of
except
those.
for Boston, who again just defied.
Yeah. Although I mean, technically, they did get a bunch younger by getting rid of
younger by retiring. I mean,
guys retiring, but yeah, I think that maybe that plays into it a little bit too. Is that you can't just have you guys not show up for a night.
So the next one we'll talk about, San Jose acquired Jack Studnicka. I'm assuming you did that to me because you wanted to hear me pronounce it. Vancouver for Nick Surchek at a 2024 sixth.
I thought maybe you wanted to talk about a San Jose trade.
I know I want to talk about. Normally, I want to talk about a San Jose trade, but at the moment they don't matter. And this is the thing: most San Jose trades at the moment, unless it involves a pick, don't matter. I was fascinated. I was fascinated that we sent a sixth to Vancouver. That's baffling. Why are we giving them away? We need to get more of them. Don't give them away.
Fair.
Now the last one, which I mentioned, was more name value wise. It feels like something, but when you look at the underlying numbers, not necessarily.
No.
The Islanders acquired Robert Bortuzzo from St. Louis for a 2024 seventh.
He feels like an Islanders player at this point in his career.
If you had said in that cup run that he would eventually be traded for a seventh, I don't think anyone would have believed you.
To be honest, I kind of thought Robert Bortuzzo retired. I kind of forgot that he was still in the league.
I mean, he was retired technically. He's been playing on the Blues.
Well, yeah, but I think the thing I love about Robert Bortuzzo is the nickname Bobby Ortuzzo, because very occasionally he will just carry it end to end and score a goal, and it's just incredible. He's just not the player that you would expect to do that, and all of a sudden he just dangles a bunch of guys, and it's that's incredible. I don't know. I kind of wanted to include it just for Penguins memories.
Oh yeah, it's I kind of I kind of went name wise. Oh, Bortuzzo, no, he's not been good for a very long time. PTOs are interesting.
Yeah.
Jesse Puljujarvi in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I was honestly surprised by it because it's something that I've been kind of thinking they should do for 6 months.
For people who are new to this,
yeah,
we've both kind of been, not that he's the greatest player alive, but we've both kind of been Jesse Puljujarvi truthers for a while. In terms of he's a lot better than what the Oilers media made him out to be. And
I'll admit I have some bias because I have him on a dynasty team. But there's something about him that it's hard not to like him as a person. He's just such a fun-loving dude. You can see all these pictures of him with his tongue sticking out while he's playing and stuff. I'm just I want this guy to succeed.
See, I remain horrified by the fact that we've talked about this before. They started him on McDavid's wing. And it started fine.
Yeah.
And then he got hurt and they never put him back.
And part of it was he was also playing well a lot of the time, but it wasn't resulting in like a bunch of goals and stuff. Like it didn't look like what they wanted it to look like. But anyway, like I think obviously he had some issues with his hips. He's had this double hip surgery. It's not quite the same as like the Patrick Can resurfacing kind of thing. This is a less kind of, I think, awful sounding procedure. But he has been for the last couple of weeks training with the team. I think he's kind of working back up to game shape. He hasn't played a game yet or anything like that. I'd be curious to see what he looks like. I'm rooting for the guy. I hope that it works out, and I'm happy for the Penguins. I like taking these kind of swings on. I think he's still 25.
He's still really young.
That's that's good value to you. You may as well give it a shot.
Look, I'm really wanting this to work. I really like. We've said it before. I love Jesse Puljujarvi, and I feel like he never got the fair chance in Edmonton.
Yeah, I would love to see him succeed somewhere. I mean, he also didn't really kind of do a heap in Carolina, but I think that he was injured by then as well, and maybe you just never really clicked for him there.
I think taking the time to deal with the injury has been quite good, and probably quite useful. Also, on a PTO at the moment, Aaron Dell, who is once again bouncing his way around the league. Aaron Dell finds himself on I don't know, I haven't counted how many teams this is now, but he's on a PTO with the Carolina Hurricanes. Now, this is obviously because they've had a nightmare of injuries in net, although it does sound like basically Freddie Anderson looks like he's good.
Yeah.
Finally.
And also the poor performance of Antti Raanta, who went through waivers the other day.
They thought they had their tandem in there.
Yeah, I mean, he's generally been he's been a Band-Aid boy over the years. Like, he's definitely, always missed a bunch of games with injury, but he's usually been a pretty consistent
he's good when he needs to fill.
Yeah, he played some really good stretches for them last year, but clearly it just kind of hasn't been working out for him at this point. He's been sent to the NHL to try to recuperate his game, and hopefully he makes it back.
Like, if you remember with Antti Raanta, if you remember when he sort of burst onto the scene, he played a bit with the Blackhawks. Then the Rangers, it was really that run where he subbed in for Henrik, and he played. He had a 9.19 and a 9.22 in 2 seasons, and then he was decent in his first year in Arizona. He had 9.30, and then this year has been an 8.54.
Yeah, I mean, there was a little while there where he was kind of the guy that people were looking at as maybe he'll be a starter somewhere. He didn't end up being the former New York goalie who ended up as a starter on a team. There were other guys that eventually kind of got that gig, but
that was the reason why he ended up in Arizona, because he thought he was next in line, and they sort of had a younger pipeline in mind, which they pursued. And look, for the Rangers, it worked out quite well. Definitely. They had a good decision between two decent young goalies, and they picked the right one.
Yes.
So I don't think you can argue that they made the mistake there.
No, I mean, Raanta at this point in his career, I think too, is also something like 32 or whatever. We're not talking about a young goalie anymore.
Yeah, but that's but then when you decide that Aaron Dell is the solution to the problem,
I think he's a Band-Aid for now.
Yeah, look, former Sharks legend Aaron Dell. And every now and then he turns up in the Shark Tank and plays a couple of games, and then we send him off somewhere else. And he comes back and we play him for a couple of games, and send him off somewhere else. I mean, look, it wouldn't surprise me actually. I was thinking about this with looking at the goalie situation in Carolina. San Jose and Carolina have some trade history now. And a decent trade report with this current, obviously, the Greer general manager situation. I kind of wonder if a team was going to come in for Mackenzie Blackwood near the deadline, kind of think that maybe Carolina might be the destination.
I can see that for sure. Yeah, I think that would make a lot of sense.
I talked before about there was a lot of talk. Oh, well, the Oilers need a goalie. Yeah, San Jose is not helping the Oilers out for anything less than handsome. You are giving us every pick you can think of if you would like one of our players, please. It's like Vegas. We're not sending. Vegas could come and knock on the door and go, "Hey, we'd like X." And it's like, great, the price is triple.
Yeah. Before we do move on from this, while we're talking about returning goalies, did you see Marc-Andre Fleury's return to Pittsburgh recently?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, it was a bit of a disappointment. It kind of seemed like he was queued up to be the starter for that game because, most likely this was kind of unofficially, probably the last time we'd see Marc-Andre Fleury in Pittsburgh. There was a little bit of a tribute kind of, thing to him. Unfortunately, he didn't get like the start in the end, which, based on his performance of late, I totally understand. But it was a little bit of a disappointment, I think, still for that. But we did still see some, classic Fleury pranks. He swapped Chris Letang's helmet so that he would have had to go out in the white helmet, and he would have gotten fined. So, in the end, he got it back, and he didn't end up getting fined for it. Apparently, he also put tape on Gino's visor. Just classic Fleury stuff. Like
just being a pest.
Yeah. I mean,
he's known as quite a pest.
Yeah.
I always felt that was the reason why they actually moved him. It was less to do with cap space and more got to get him out of the locker room.
Look, they all still love him. Like,
it's a hazard to walk into this locker room.
Everyone still loves him. Yeah, like everyone's got a dozen Fleury prank stories about people.
Mike Sullivan finds himself taped to the roof,
hung up at the in the rafters and stuff like that.
It's like, where's Mike? He's not running practice today. Up in a locker like this. Help me. Speaking of coaches that need help, there we go. There's a segue for you.
Well done.
The St. Louis Blues relieved head coach Craig Berube of his duties. Now, this, first of all, not unexpected. They've been playing absolutely horrendously. What was interesting about this situation, however, it had nothing to do necessarily with the Berube firing, and it had everything to do with it was the next day, and they were asking, they had the player availability, and they spoke to Jordan Kyrou, and they said to Jordan Kyrou, what do you feel about Berube, blah, 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 and he goes, he's not my coach anymore.
Yeah.
And he said later on, he felt like he was trying to focus on the game at hand, and he wanted to focus on what he was doing. It wasn't intended as a slight at Berube in any way, shape, or form.
It's a little bit, I don't know.
Yeah, and then that night when the St. Louis Blues took to the ice, every time Jordan Kyrou got the puck, the crowd booed him mercilessly. And he actually ended up crying in his post-game availability about the fact that he's like, it's just horrible that the fans are treating me like this, and I feel really bad. I didn't mean to say anything bad. I wasn't saying anything bad. This is a really big misunderstanding. And I mean, it's a bit of a reminder to everyone in the league to be careful about how you do media availabilities.
Well, I mean, we wonder why we don't see players say things more often, and then that's the result. So,
yeah, I feel like, again, this was not a surprise, but it's also one of those things where we talked before about, Colorado didn't feel like a team that was going to be, we've got our cup, let's cruise. No, that's exactly what St. Louis was. Was we pulled a cup out of nowhere because we switched coaches. We went to Berube, we switched coaches, Magic, whatever, PDO Bender, certain players deciding they were the greatest player on earth for about 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Those sorts of things happen, and they win a cup out of it. But you've not thought that anything like that of them since. This is not going to be that team. And if you look, it is kind of a Land of Misfit Toys roster. I
mean, they had like kind of the end of an era really around about that time. They had a bunch of guys who were kind of finishing up their career there. Ryan O'Reilly, and they're kind of old core of
that was the last
Chen and Schwartz.
That was legitimately being discussed as could be Tarasenko's last season.
Yeah. And all those guys are gone now. It's a completely different roster now.
It's okay. Jordan Bennington's there to fight people.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, glad we gave him that giant contract.
So, Brendan Saad's around. But if you looked at the roster again, it's a bunch of names, but it's a bunch of names that are a little bit older than you think they are, and a little bit less good than you remember them. You know, Kevin Hayes, who's there on a paid out version of his absolutely ridiculous Philadelphia contract. Who took that on? St. Louis. You've got, you know, everybody's favorite lead singer of Matchbox 20 is there. Rob Thomas. Slash creator of iZombie. Prefer that one. By the way, if you've never seen the episode of iZombie where Rob Thomas from Matchbox 20 is on it, where the zombies are all singing "Lonely No More," it's fantastic. Colton Parayko, who I feel like his time to move and go and do something else has come and gone and come and gone and come. This is where Kasperi Kapanen has gone to die.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's a real group of underwhelming defensemen there in that batch of Falk, Krug, Parayko, and Leddy. Really, like
remember the Torrey Krug thing Torrey Krug was signed there because they couldn't make their big defensive reacquisition at the time. So they threw all the money at Torrey Krug.
Yeah.
It was not the same thing. So I feel bad for Berube, but on the other hand, how can you feel bad for a guy who literally came in and won a cup?
Yeah.
Came in, won a cup.
I'm sure he's not too upset.
He didn't actually do much for it. Like, motivated the troops a little bit, made them more accountable, tightened them up a bit. They got a really good run through those playoffs too. Don't forget, they got a really good run through those playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, look, I feel like this isn't this is a team that hasn't really kind of finished reworking this roster. Like, there's still some remnants of that old guard there. You know, they've got the new guys in, you know, Thomas and Kyrou and Buchnevich and so forth that have, you know, that maybe weren't there to begin with, and they're starting to, you know, kind of turn some things around. They've got, you know, some rookies starting to come in, like Neighbors and so forth, and, you know, that are starting to find spots on the team. I'll be interested to see what they look like in a few years' time. I'm not sure if they have the depth to suddenly become a contender again or anything, but you know, it just feels like the natural cycle of the team. You know, they did well to win before they got to this point. You know, it was real close, but they didn't.
I mean, again, as a Sharks fan, you take that.
Yeah.
But like, it's for me as well. The other thing is too, I think St. Louis's big problem is that a couple of the teams that they are sort of scrapping with down the bottom have started their rebuilds and have got a massive jump on them.
Yeah.
So they're in a division where the trash teams at the bottom have really kicked their rebuilds into high gear. Obviously, some of them have had some luck when it comes to lotteries. I'm looking at you, Chicago. And, yeah, they're going to find themselves scrapping with teams trying to do a slow rebuild, scrapping with teams that have gone out and ready loaded players, including what is looking like the future best player of the league. And that's a really hard thing to do. Yeah. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see where they go from there and what they end up doing. So Drew Bannister is the new interim head coach. We have a couple of vacancies because the other one we need to talk about is the Ottawa Senators, who let DJ Smith run the practice. Apparently, I was listening to a couple of reports. The Dangle podcast talked about it, and 30 Thoughts talked about it as well. 32 Thoughts talked about it as well. That he was keeping it light and breezy, and it was a fun one, and it was getting everyone out there and raise the morale of the troops, and they let him run the whole practice, then dragged him in and went, "You're fired." Now, Jacques Martin, who was brought in 2 weeks ago as I was so disappointed because I said to Brendan, we were ready. There were jokes ready to talk about the fact they've brought in the coaching advisor, former coach Jacques Martin. And how long is it going to be until Jacques Martin finds himself in the seat? The answer was less than 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And Daniel Alfredson has gone from not being with the organization at all with Eugene Melnyk there to now an assistant coach.
I'm curious when the other shoe will drop with this, though, because, you know, Jacques Martin at this point in time is like 71, I think.
Yeah, well, they've basically, it's Dangle's comment the other day was, and I kind of believe him on this. He's like, there is someone they want, they can't get him yet.
Yeah,
so Jacques Martin is a placeholder.
Yeah, I imagine that's who's there until at least the end of the year, and then maybe a little bit longer if something suddenly breaks well. But I mean, obviously the Senators haven't lived up to the expectations that people put on them. This season, but people have been talking about for a couple of years really now. Every off season, it's like, oh, the Senators have won the off season. They look incredible. They're going to be, they're going to win the cup. They're going to be in the playoffs, and then it doesn't really happen. And that's kind of happened again this season. They've obviously, severely underperformed people's hopes for them. Whether, there's still obviously like 50 games left in the season or whatever, maybe they can start to turn that around, but they're already, a sub 500 team. They're at the bottom of a not particularly good division. And the likelihood of them digging their way out to being a wildcard team like we kind of expected that they might be is probably unlikely at this point.
So, a sort of follow-up question to this. Which is the more appealing position? Is it St. Louis or Ottawa? I think it's probably Ottawa.
I think it's still Ottawa. There's a lot of good on, there's a lot of good pieces on Ottawa. A lot of good young pieces. A lot of.
I think the question for me is: do you want the young pieces they've put on Ottawa, or do you want the opportunity in St. Louis to scrap it?
I think that St. Louis is going to be difficult to tear down. There's a lot of term on a lot of those contracts, and I think that there's going to be a few more years of pain before they can really start to rebuild that. I think I'd still rather much be in, I think that Ottawa have still the more valuable pieces, even at this point in their build.
I think so too. Ottawa. I mean, Ottawa. Look, obviously, Ottawa every year win the preseason cup.
Yeah. Yeah,
they win. They're the greatest team in the history of mankind. They're, Ottawa's, and I feel like we talk a lot about the Canadian media, and we talk about the Canadian media, especially in Toronto, Montreal, and Edmonton. They're wild. Like the Sens media is wild. It's just that nobody looks at it.
Yeah.
Because they are so desperate for relevance that they spend all of their time telling everyone how good they're going to be. And they're still not there. They've got pieces that should be amazing. Like Stutzler, Tkachuk, Norris, they should be fantastic. And this year, for example, at the moment, you've got Stutzler's doing fine in terms of he's got a lot of assists this year. Not a lot of goals, but a lot of assists. He's got 30 points in 27 games.
Yeah.
But only 6 of those are goals. Brady Tkachuk's a weird player for me. I'm not as hyped on Brady Tkachuk as a lot of other people are.
I like his game, to be honest, but
I feel like he's the shit-talking lightning rod that his brother is, but he can't quite back it up to the same level. I think Matthew's a far better player than Brady.
I think that's true as well.
And I think the problem is that Brady quite often tries to play Matthew's game.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think that we necessarily need to go super, through the entirety of the Senators roster. I think that you can look at the glaring hole at goal for the last few years, and the bet that they made on Joonas Korpisalo and Anton Forsberg that really hasn't worked out.
Yeah, and I mean, let's face it, that's the decision that got a general manager fired.
Yeah.
Realistically, that, and obviously, losing draft picks by making an illegal trade, they're the two things that got a general manager fired. But I kind of feel like, and we talked about this before, he was getting fired, but they were just waiting for that to drop before they fired him. That they failed to fix the back end up at all, and that's a problem. So the big news today, / not news today, / news today, / not news today, is that Nolan Patrick is retiring, or not retiring, or maybe retiring, or could be retiring, or might have retired, or might not have retired, or might have just gone to bed.
I mean, I guess the story behind the scenes of that is that obviously, Nolan Patrick's been struggling with concussion issues and injuries for a long time. He hasn't played in a while. He's been in and out of, NHL rosters for the last few years. And he really, at this point in his career, I think he's 25, but he only has 4 NHL seasons under his belt, and a lot of those are partial seasons, and never really kind of I think he was the number 2 draft pick, I want to say, off the top of my head, in that year when the Flyers, made a huge jump up the 2017 draft. The Flyers kind of jumped out from like not really in the lottery to taking the number 2 pick, and look, it's kind of unfortunate that it. I mean, even before this, it didn't seem good for him. Like, it didn't seem that the likelihood of him having a long NHL career was particularly good. But I don't know where this rumor suddenly came from that like someone with confidence announced that he's retiring.
And it wasn't like a nobody who was like,
no,
it wasn't nobody's. And like even when Friedman like reached out and then sort of put out a thing going, he's not retiring.
Yeah.
Friedman was confused. Like, it didn't sound like Friedman was like convinced. It sounded like they've said he's not retiring, but like it wasn't like, oh well, that was just a crap rumor that someone made up. It sounded very much like that the bit of information that Elliot Friedman got fed was maybe, don't know.
Yeah. I mean, so it was a writer from the Hockey News that said like, look, basically he's officially retired, and then not long after that, within a few hours, it was suddenly like, no, he's not. He says that he's not. I wonder whether they kind of caught whiff of like discussions. I imagine that there must have been serious discussions at least over the last few years about like, you probably shouldn't play again. The likelihood of you playing again is low and all this kind of stuff. And it sound, maybe there was a discussion recently. I'm just, pulling, ideas out of the ether as to how this came about. But surely someone must have gotten whiff of like, hey, someone said to him that he should retire and he's seriously considering it or whatever, and they've taken it too far or whatever, something's got lost in translation. But he must be at this point of that discussion regardless.
Well, that for me feels like something where there would need to be conversations within the NHLPA. Right. And this is the thing. It feels like maybe there were conversations around with the NHLPA, and people have heard that they're looking into options around what happens with the contract and what do they do. And someone's heard the conversation around that and gone, he's retiring. And broke.
I mean, from the standpoint currently, he technically doesn't right now have an NHL contract. He was under contract with the Vegas Golden Knights until last season. That expired and didn't get signed this year, which I imagine is part of why.
Yeah, but the it would be more about the PA and care and the NHL and stuff like that. Because if he's not retired, he can still use the NHL and reach out for healthcare and stuff like that. And you get. I mean,
that's true. I mean, look, there probably is a significant legal difference at this point between whether or not he's officially retired or whether or not he's just like unable to play and an NHL alarm or whatever. And I don't know. I'm curious about what happened there. We might never find out exactly the reason what just happened there. But
as you said before, like when you rethink about that 27 draft and the fact that the Nico versus Nolan thing was like, it was weeks and weeks and weeks. And look, honestly, before Nico Hischier sort of emerged at the tail end of that process, Nolan Patrick was the universal number 1 pick.
Yeah.
Right up until about 3/4 of the way through the season before. Then you started hearing, well, maybe Nico Hischier might be in the mix.
I mean, obviously, he didn't really have these issues, I believe, like when he started in the NHL. Like, he within a year was, playing almost full time for the Flyers. He started in kind of like a third line role, and I think that they were happy with, kind of what they had there. He was looking like, maybe he's a 40-point player or whatever, at this point in his career, and maybe he'll break out later. And then all of those, those injuries and stuff started, which is, just unfortunate.
Yeah, I again, it's not nice and it's not ideal, and obviously you hope that he heals up, and just not so much for playing. You just hope that he heals up so he can like live a decent life.
Yeah, so, regardless of whether he plays or not. I mean, it's long-term consequences.
Now, the big debate point, and a lot of people in the chat have been bringing this up today. Alexander Ovechkin Now, we talked about this on the last podcast, and I'm sure he's going to heat up, and he looks like he's starting to get some. Okay, look, yeah, okay, it looked like he might fix it up. He hasn't scored a goal since November 18.
Yeah, that's tough. He had a primary assist today in overtime. I didn't see it, so I don't know if it just like went off Strome instead of something. But like he's still shooting. He's trying his best. He's played played 14 games since then and taken 51 shots. So his shot rate is still up. He's just not converting anymore.
I'm getting less and less confident by the day.
Yeah,
I don't think he's getting there. And like, it's a weird one. I don't even know if it's necessarily an Ovi drop off, or if he just has been shooting at such a ridiculously high rate for so long that it's a leveling. It's not necessarily a drop off. I think it's a leveling.
I think there's a little bit of multiple factors to it. I think that, obviously he's like 38 and, that was eventually going to catch up to him. And I think that it has been catching up to him for a little while, but he's still managed to juice those numbers through, playing 100% of the power play, having a lot of kind of help around to, basically the Capitals for a couple of years now have been a one-man band that's set up to get over the goal record.
And power play will come back up again in a minute, everybody, because it's
So I mean, like a massive part of his total is just because of those situations that he was being put in for the last few years, and I just think that they've had a harder time putting him in that situation in a way that's been successful. A lot of that's been the roster around him, like they don't exactly look like them. They've somehow managed to still win some games. I really don't understand how the Capitals are winning games.
I legitimately, without looking at the roster, I can't tell you who's on the top two lines of the Capitals.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough Kuznetsov isn't.
He's not on the top two lines.
No. He's been awful, and he's been like healthy scratched and stuff. He's playing on the third line.
So if there's one thing that you do with a team that's this bad, I'm assuming Tom Wilson's probably up there.
Tom Wilson is still on Ovechkin's line on the other side, but he's playing.
They're paying Kuznetsov $7.8 million to do nothing.
Yeah, they're currently technically, at least by daily face-off, it might not necessarily be by timeline ice. I don't have like frozen tools or anything in front of me, but technically their second line, although both of them are bad, their second and third line. Let's read it out this way: is Alexis Protas, Henriks Lapierre, and Anthony Mantha on the second line. Matthew Phillips, Evgeny Kuznetsov, and Ivan Miroshchenko on the third line. Beck Millenstein, Nick Dowd, and Nicholas Aube-Kubel on the fourth line. Like, who the fuck are these guys?
Fucking hell. So I just had a look at the numbers. So Ovi in 28 has 17 points, 12 goals, 12 assists, 5 goals. He used to read it the other way around. Kuznetsov, 24 games, 5 goals, 6 assists, 11 points, and he's a -6. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like Ovi slowed down a bit, which, given the way that he plays, the way that he throws around his body and has for a long time, I'm not shocked about. I mean, the interesting thing for me is like, outside of all of that, their power play is still mostly the same dudes. Like, it's still Wilson, Kuznetsov, Ovechkin, Karlsson. And instead of Backstrom, they have Dylan Strome there. So it's like still mostly the same power play. It's just not working anymore.
So I'm gonna jump ahead to we've got a segment we're doing at the very end of this, which is what do teams want under their Christmas tree. I'm gonna briefly jump ahead to what I put down for Washington because it's relevant to the conversation. I put down that Washington would like anything for the power play. And the reason for that is that they have the lowest number of power plays in the NHL. 82 power plays. That is the lowest in the league by a fair gap in terms of large numbers. Their closest opponents have had 85, which are the Sharks and the Leafs. So they've had 82 power plays. The Sharks and Leafs have had 85. The Leafs have 22 goals in 85 power plays. The Sharks have 18 goals in 85 power plays. The Capitals have 8 in 82. That is disgusting.
Yeah.
You want to know why Ovechkin's not scoring? 8 goals in 82 power plays. That
I
is
mean,
horrific.
yeah, I mean, look, I to be honest, I haven't watched a heap of their power play footage or anything like that. I don't know whether the goal is still get it to Ovi and let him shoot it, and maybe the just the other elements to their power play has fallen away, that no one's scared of anything anymore, and they don't have other options or what. I don't know what's happened that's just not working anymore. It could just be bad luck. Like we have seen at times, just someone just has a bad shooting season, and it could be that, like, or there could be adjustments that have been made that Ovi hasn't been able to adjust to, or it could just be age. It could just be, something's come off, 5%'s come off his shot and it's just not there anymore. But I don't know. I'm interested to see how he responds to this. Obviously he is, and we've talked about this for a while. Maybe the best goal scorer that ever played the game, and I think that maybe it's time for him to find different ways to score. Like maybe he needs to find some other element of his game if he still wants to. You look at Crosby, who came into the league around about the same time, who is still, excelling at this point in his career at 38, 37, 38. Yeah, I'm curious to see what, Ovechkin can do. Obviously, he's a little bit more of a one-dimensional kind of, player in that regard. I wonder if he can find a way to, keep it up.
Okay, my question is, how many power play goals does he have this year?
I think that it will bounce back. Like, I think that...
How many does he have currently?
I don't know off the top of my head. Do you know?
One.
Yeah. Okay. That doesn't shock me.
He has 4 even strength goals and 1 power play goal.
Yeah, I mean that's a big part of his. I wouldn't be shocked, honestly. Like they still have like 50 games left or whatever. How many games have the Capitals played? They played 29, so they still have 53 games left. I still wouldn't be shocked if Ovi finds a way to get we've seen it before, to just like get like 20 more goals in that. In that stretch, if the
I don't think it's coming.
Power play starts working, but it's probably not going to happen. I would say, like, conservatively, let's say, do you think that he breaks 20 goals this season?
No.
You don't think so?
I don't think Washington's good enough.
I think he finds a way. I don't
think he does, because my question, and like we've talked about him and what's the problem with him.
Yeah.
But as you sort of alluded to before, I think the other question is, somebody has to get Alexander Ovechkin the puck. And the problem is as well, if teams think that there's no one else on the ice that's a problem, you double man Ovechkin. You know he's not going to outskate you. You know he's not going to outpace you. You know he's going to find his way towards the point. You know they're going to try to take the puck in deep. They're going to try to drag everyone out, and then they're going to try to flick it back to Ovechkin for an easy shot. So you double team Ovechkin.
I think that there's going to be a couple of games where he scores like 3 or 4. Like that's just kind of how he is. Like, and I think that's going to goose the numbers. I think that the majority of that 50 games is going to look like this. Maybe he gets another like 5 or 10 or something just through the course of that game. But I think there's just a couple of games in there where he gets like 3 that gooses those numbers a little bit, and he gets real close to 20. But I think that the plus, above or below 20 for the season is, that's maybe where the money line is.
Yeah, I think I don't think he gets 20, and I think the chance that the Gretzky record's gone. I think it's gone. I don't think he's getting there.
It's getting risky for sure.
I just feel like as well, I think the other big question is, if it doesn't pick up this season, what happens in the off season? Especially given that, if you think about it, Kuznetsov's not been great. So Kuznetsov being healthy scratched and not playing and not enjoying himself and all of those sorts of things. There's no Backstrom, obviously, because that's the LTIR off to the end of time. Does Ovi want to go around and do this again?
I mean, it would be interesting.
Or would he like to go back to Russia and be paid a small fortune in the KHL?
I wonder if they decided to rebuild, if he would, try to stretch it out on another team or something. He starts to do the Florida tour of the.
That's an interesting question too. Does Ovechkin decide? And I'm going to say this for absolute shit posting. Does Ovechkin decide to take an absolutely low salary with the salary cap going up to play on the left wing of Austin Matthews?
Well, look, he still has 2 more years on this deal, so I can't see how that happens unless they retain.
They've got the greatest general manager in Toronto in the world. You know that. Look at the depth he signed. Look at the depth. It's amazing. Yeah. It's not all being LTIR'd out the door at all. None of it.
But look, I can't see a world where Ovechkin continues to shoot 4.5%, even at this point in his career. I think that there's a bounce back coming this season. I don't know if it's still enough to comfortably, make that record that it looked like he was a shoo-in for just a year ago. But I can't imagine that he continues to shoot at this rate. But even if he doubles it, that's still maybe 15, 16 goals on the season, which is
now time for what is fast going to become my favorite segment of a podcast. It's time for Patrick Kane Watch. So we need a thing. We need a sting. We need something. So I am here for Patrick Kane Watch because we have both gone on record to say we don't think this is going to work.
Well, look, I think that it was important to kind of touch base on where this was because the last time we recorded was about just over 2 weeks ago. He was just about to play his first game.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, he wasn't at that point playing. And interestingly, if we'd recorded this yesterday, this would have looked a lot worse than today. He actually significantly goosed his numbers in just today, just by this very small sample size. Obviously, we're talking about a sample size right now of 8 games. But before today, he was a -7. He had 1 goal and 2 assists, and only one of those points was at even strength. Like 3 of those points all came on the power play, but he got 1 goal and 1 assist at even strength today in a losing game that they'd already lost by the time he scored. But that's kind of goosed his numbers to be like 5 points in 8 games and 3 points in even strength. So it looks a lot better than it did.
And let's not forget, of course, and friend of the podcast who I know is watching this, Tim. I need to remind him that, of course, the debut for Patrick Kane came in that great game for the Red Wings where they jumped out to an unassailable lead against your San Jose Sharks, everybody. They're your San Jose Sharks. They're Mike Greer's San Jose Sharks, folks. And the Sharks came running back and won and ran straight past them. And he looked like a pylon while the Sharks just ran past him.
I mean, look, that's always been who Kane is, though. Like, Kane hasn't been a defensively good player at any point in his career. He's just usually made up for it. I mean, it is, notable that the Red Wings are 1-6-1 during that stretch of 8 games. I don't know how much of that realistically you can pin on Kane himself, because they were already kind of struggling a little bit, and their goaltending has just been horrendous. So, that's obviously a big part of it. Look, I think that for me, he's kind of been who I kind of expected he would be at this point. Like he's, cashed in a bit on the power play. He's, been, an offensive option for them. But he's, quickly slid down the lineup from being, a top 6, winger to being someone that they shelter and put out in offensive situations in the hope that his playmaking, scores in the goal.
He's gone from being the robust, man to the guy in the old folks' home who talks about remember when, and talks about what he used to be able to do when he was younger and fitter. And everyone goes, "Sure, Granddad, sure," and then takes him out for his dinner and takes his teeth out, and all that. Look, I'm not surprised that hasn't worked, and I don't think it's going to suddenly take off after today. Meaningless goals don't really, funnily enough, they're meaningless for a reason. So let's move into, before we move into the last segment, there was a point that got raised before, and I want to actually talk about this with you off the top, which was Roy raised the question, you've been named the general manager for the Oilers to replace a fired Ken Holland. What are your first 3 actions? Now, I did like the first comment, I think it was Shannon who put it down, was resign. And, I mean, that is probably something I would do. But I think... The fixing the Oilers is really hard, and it's not. This is not giving credit to Ken Holland about, well, he's got a hard job, because he made the job hard. It wasn't hard. He made it that way. The Oilers are, if you listen to the Canadian media, the hottest team in hockey, and are clearly going to win the cup again because they've won some games. They're still 3rd last in their own division, and they've got games in hand, but they're lucky. The Pacific is trash. The Pacific is absolute trash. They are still trying to make up deficits. Look, they'll get there. They'll probably scrape a playoffs, maybe, but they've pretty much got to be perfect.
They do have a big hole to dig their way out of. Like, obviously, you know, their PDO has been really low. The Vancouver has been really high, and there's a good chance that those two teams flip around and have a different, you know, end of the season. But there's a big gap to make up, especially in, you know, Bettman's NHL with loser points and so forth. Like, you know, you start getting like 8-10 points down, you can win 6 or 7 in a row and barely make a dent in that.
They're lucky that the Oilers are lucky that for the Pacific, the Flames and the Kraken haven't been great. The Golden Knights and the Canucks and the Kings are sort of cleared out at the top, and then there's a gap, and then there's the Oilers after the gap.
I mean, like, they're not that far out of a wild card spot.
They're not that far out of a wild card spot. However, what I would also say there is, I think the Central's probably got a decent chance here of taking the extra spot. I think that the Coyotes have been solidly decent. Yeah. I think the Preds have been solid enough, which is one of my preseason predictions. The Blues are about to see what happens. I mean, granted, they're about to see what happens when they move into a post-Berube era and what they decide to do with that. You can't imagine that the Wild are going to stink forever. And here's the interesting point. So the Wild haven't been brilliant to start this year, but they're now 7-3-0 in the last 10. The Wild are only one game ahead of the Oilers, but they're 3 points up still.
Mm-hmm.
The Wild are second last in the Central. Like, that's horrific. The Wild are second last in the Central, and they've got more points than the Oilers, and the Oilers can't catch them.
Yeah.
So when we say they've got to dig themselves out of a massive hole, we mean it. They are in a huge hole. And since the Canadian media turned around and they went on that little bit of a heater and they went, oh, they're on fire, they've lost their last 3. So I don't think the Oilers are what people are. I think people want the Oilers to be something they're not. What would I fix? The first thing I would do is you've got to find a goalie. I don't care how you find a goalie. You've got to find a goalie.
Yeah. Like, I mean, look, we were talking about before we started recording, like the moment that McDavid and Draisaitl aren't leading the league in points, all of a sudden the Oilers aren't a winning team, and that's not a way to build a team. Like, I don't want to cut you off, but like I'm looking at this roster. I don't think that there's 3 easy moves that fixes the Oilers. I think there's a lot of depth work to be done there. I think that you really
need a Calvin Pickett in net.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's impossible to do this, but I don't think that you can have one guy come in and make, you know, a couple of quick deadline moves and all of a sudden this is a great team or anything.
Well, they did that. They did that last year, remember? That was Matthias Ekholm.
Yeah. Look, I think that there's about 6 guys on this team that I like, and I would fucking scrap the rest and replace them with better players.
The problem for the Oilers is they're starting to move, and people talk about Toronto need to move one of the big 4 the only way. They're starting to get to a point where literally the only way to fix this roster might be to make one move. And it's not a move you want to make. It's not McDavid. It's Draisaitl. And I wouldn't necessarily want to do it, but the return you would ask for to back for Leon Draisaitl would give you enough chance to get some players and get some cap capital and get some ability to move things around. Now, I don't think they should do it, but what I'm saying is they've cornered themselves. Like, they've got nothing they can move, and they've got nothing. There's nothing of value they can shift. The top 5 players by contract on the offense are all no moves, all of them.
Yeah.
McDavid, Draisaitl, Hyman, Evander Kane, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. All of those have no move clauses. So you are looking at, we're starting with Warren Fogle.
Yeah. I mean, there's no one of value to move. That's definitely like a concern. The thing is, like, you look at this roster and like the long-term outlook isn't that bleak in one way and it is in another. It's not that bleak because most of these contracts are like 1 or 2 year contracts. Like, good 60% of the roster comes off in the next couple of years. And if you are smart, if you make like informed decisions and sign good hockey players, then you could build a significantly good team around those core players. The unfortunate reality is that Draisaitl is also up in 2 years and McDavid is up in 3. And you've almost kind of cornered yourself at this point into a situation where you have to convince them that you're going to be competitive. And I don't know how you do that with the history of their entire time playing for the Oilers.
If they don't sack genuinely, if they don't sack Ken Holland before you get to the point where you're negotiating the new contract with Draisaitl, they're not getting Draisaitl back. Like, because if you're Leon Draisaitl, you find the answer. Like, there's nothing that he's done that suggests that he knows how to fix this. I think the way they've built this roster feels like they've put no thought into it in terms of what do we need on the second line, what do we need on the third line, what do we need here, what do we need here, what do we need here. I still think, for example, even with what they're paying him, I still think they're overpaying Evander Kane. Like, we know I don't like Evander Kane anyway, but even still, at the time when they re-signed Evander Kane, he's been fine, but he's not been, the signing that they needed to make when their cap space was so limited and they really needed to go out and get, like, defense and a goalie. They went out and got Evander Kane. And, like, what they seem to have done with the coaching change is they haven't tightened themselves up defensively. They haven't got themselves better in net. They're just getting Connor and Leon to score. And their plan has gone back to, we'll just outscore everyone in the league again. That's not Stanley Cup winning hockey.
No, the last few years, every time they got a little bit of cap space, like they would have like, oh, wow, the Oilers are going into this offseason with like 6-7 million in cap space. And then, they could make, 2-3 moves and improve their depth and all of a sudden have a good third line and have a decent defense and, sign a decent goalie or something like that. And then they'll just sign like one dude and give him all of that money or do, and it's just like, what the fuck? Like, what?
I mean, Oilers Nation was ready. The Oilers were ready to carry fucking Ken Holland high on the shoulders for re-signing Sam Gagner. If you think Sam Gagner is the change you need to see in the world, you've got a problem.
Yeah,
against him. But come on, like, that's going to fix everything? No, it will not. And they've signed now. If you actually look at their signings, this is the other thing I think that a lot of people miss out on with what they've signed. They're not signing young players. Like, Hyman's 31, Kane's 32, Nugent Hopkins is 30. Think about that for a minute. Matthias Janmark's 31, Derek Ryan's 36.
I think that they know that their window is the next couple of years because, like, I don't see why Draisaitl and McDavid re-sign in 2-3 years time if. And I mean, look, they can re-sign Draisaitl in like about a year, and
at the conclusion of this season, they can re-sign that contract.
Yeah, and then he's an expiring contract, and like, what have they done that's made it obvious to him that he should stick around?
They're still paying money off the James Neal buyout. They've got 2 years of that left, and they've now got the Jack Campbell contract, which is buried in the minors. The way that they go after players feels confusing. There's no plan. There's no rhyme or reason to building the roster, which, again, my big complaint around a lot of Canadian franchises actually is that, and I think you don't want to be one of those people that blames Canadian media, but I think there's an element of that with the Oilers and Toronto. I think they've got the same problem. Which is, and the Habs to some extent have the same issue as well, although obviously it's in Quebecois and we don't speak French. But the media spends a lot of time telling the franchise how it needs to be fixed, and the franchise spends a lot of time listening. And they probably shouldn't.
Yeah.
Because it's never the answer. It's never the answer.
No, I mean, look, I think there's something to be said for, a general manager who has an open mind to newer concepts about hockey, coming in and just cleaning house or being given room to work for a couple of years and just surrounding the core of this team with the talent that they just haven't had the entire time.
The irony is that Canadian uncles everywhere would like their team to win a cup, And until Canadian uncles everywhere stop telling teams how to do it, it's not happening.
Yeah.
But the reason it doesn't happen is because the Canadian uncles everywhere think they know how to win a Stanley Cup.
Yeah.
Got news for you guys. Haven't won one since 1992. Anyway, let's get into the last part of this, which is what do teams want under their Christmas tree? Now, we gave you a bit of a heads up on this one before. Washington would like a power play.
Yeah. That would be helpful.
So we're going to riff off this a little bit. We've got a couple of things written down. We're mostly going to riff off this a little bit. I've got a couple of things, though, that I've got written down. So I'm going to start with Toronto. Toronto would like some depth scoring. And I say this because I sat down before to work out what has been wrong with Toronto. Because they're not horrendous, but they've not been brilliant. Austin Matthews has scored the quietest 25 goals you've ever heard of in your life.
Yeah.
Like you look up today and you're like, oh, he's leading the league. Okay, where did that come from?
Yeah, there's been some really interesting, goal leaders at this point in time. Like,
he came out of absolutely nowhere to lead the league.
Yeah.
Trust me, I know. I have, as Brendan knows, I have him in fantasy. He went into an absolute lull for this long stretch of time. Cost me like 3 weeks in a row. The fact that he couldn't get a point, plus going to Scandinavia didn't help that either. But he suddenly got top three. But when I say depth scoring, Toronto have Matthews, then Nylander, then Marner. And Marner's only just over 10 goals. That's it. No one in Toronto has over 10 apart from those three. Like, that's not good. Like, you went out in the off-season, and again, I'll go back to the Canadian uncles. You build a third and fourth line that every Canadian uncle can be proud of.
Yeah.
No one on that third or fourth line could put the puck in the net. You know, one of the strengths that Toronto had was they did have a little bit of depth to score some goals. And Tavares has been solid in terms of as a player, but the numbers aren't great. Like, the numbers aren't great. You're starting to see the number fall off from Tavares. So what does Toronto want? Depth scoring. They'd like somebody, please, to score some goals that's not one of those three. Have you got another one before I go into another one?
Yeah, I mean, look, I didn't get a heap of time to kind of, look through, but like I probably playing a little bit off, what I was talking about before. I mean, and maybe the biggest frustration for me this year with the Penguins has been consistency. They'll turn up one game and score 8 goals, and then everyone will be great, and then the next game just kind of nobody turns up, and maybe that's. Just the frustration of an older team and the frustration of, of being that
from an
point
outside
in
perspective,
there.
they're weird. From an outside perspective, they're a weird team.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's funny because like I think that people will look at them and point to them and say like, oh, they shouldn't have traded for Carlson. They shouldn't have done this. They shouldn't have done this. But imagine how bad this team would have been if those moves had, everyone who's been brought in has really relatively been successful. Maybe Ryan Graves has honestly been the worst signing of the group of like Dubas moves since he came in, and he's the guy that the Canadian uncles would point to and go, "This was a great signing."
It was like a couple of
worst.
It was like a couple of weeks ago. Kevin Kurtz, former of the Sharks beat, and then he went to where do you go? He went to Philadelphia for a season, and then he went to the Island, or vice versa. Either way, he put out a thing the other day saying, oh, the Carlson signing, we all know in San Jose the Carlson signing was going to be terrible, and the Carlson signing's been terrible. At which point he was absolutely beaten over the head with numbers going, Erik Karlsson's been really good. You're not vaguely watching this team. You've just gone the lazy narrative. Carlson's been fine. He's not the problem. And I've like the bit of the Penguins I've watched this year, I was like, oh, is Karlsson going back and watching it? No, he's fine.
No, he's been good.
Erik Karlsson's Erik Karlsson.
It's funny. Like the names on this team, for the most part, with the exception of Rickard Rakell, who maybe it's injury related, have all been great. And I would say that honestly, like a lot of the replacements have been no worse than the awful players that they replaced. But it just kind of really hasn't added up to being.
Crosby's been very good this year.
Oh, he's been incredible. Yeah, he's
what,
still great.
5th in scoring.
Yeah, something like that. He's like got 25 points in something, games or whatever. And he's 36. So, he's doing well for his age and so forth. He's still look great. He has something like 18 goals. And this team is still just found ways to lose. That's really kind of been their season. So maybe just honestly, everyone else just fucking pulling up their socks. Honestly, really, just some like depth, talent. Actually being good would be great.
Sid going down to Tim's, getting them all some coffee, and then throwing it in their faces. So for the San Jose Sharks, for our San Jose Sharks, they're our Sharks now. And again, thank you to the people in the group who complain every time I put up the "you just got beaten by Mike Greer's," because it makes me do it so much more. More first round draft capital. You know what? It's good. What we've got is good, but it can be so much better. So again, I'm thinking something for a Mackenzie Blackwood. I'm starting to be okay with. I'm not starting to be okay. I'm okay with the idea if someone decides that maybe at the playoffs, Thomas Hertl could be a future piece of their puzzle. Would you like a Thomas Hertl? Would you like a Thomas Hertl? You know who we're actually making into genuine draft capital, which is terrifying? Granlund.
Oh yeah. Interesting. It's really interesting. Where was this when he was in Pittsburgh? Because he was fucking washed.
It's been amazing. I picked him up the other day in fantasy because I desperately needed someone who was playing a game, and he scored so many points.
I think that there's also an element of like players playing
someone has to.
Teams where there's a lot of opportunity that they wouldn't get on a competitive team.
He's got 21 points in 25 games.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I think that if some team can convince themselves that this is going to translate, they can put him on their third line or whatever. It'll be that whole fucking office thing of like, people always tell themselves that this works for them and it never works out or whatever, but it could work for us. I think that there's a real chance that some stupid team will look at that and go, yeah, he could work for us on the third line. He didn't work anywhere else doing that, but he's been playing top line minutes in San Jose and he's scoring
only 2 goals. He's only 2 goals away from beating his entire points total in Pittsburgh.
Yeah,
2 goals. 2 goals.
He did nothing in that whole time.
Again, I think so for San Jose. I think the aim Mario Ferraro. There's a lot of his name's been popping up a lot lately. I think the answer for the Sharks is more draft capital because what's been really good is we had that little bit of a fun run where everyone's like, oh my God, the Sharks are amazing. We are still in last place in the league. And I want to make that absolutely clear. We are still the last place team in the league, but we are a fun last place team in the league. We are. You cannot take your eyes. You cannot take your eyes off a San Jose Sharks game. You know if we're going to come back and score 5 goals out of nowhere.
Yeah,
we might. We've done it a few times now. So basically for the Sharks, more draft capital, please. Just someone give us some picks, lots of picks. Granlund's worth, a second. I don't care.
Whatever.
Mackenzie Blackwood will be fascinating. I don't know what the offer will be, but somebody is coming in for him. He's been brilliant. He's genuine.
I guess the question is like the real juice there is a team like Edmonton who would have to send something cap wise back. Like, are you willing to eat, the Campbell contract to get like good assets back for a Mackenzie Blackwood trade?
If it depends on what the assets are that they offer. Now Edmonton don't have their third for this year. They don't have their fourth for this year. They don't have their second for the year after. So they've got their first and their second. And they've got a first for 2025. San Jose's negotiation would have to start with the second at a minimum.
Yeah.
I would, if I'm Mike Greer, I know that I've got something that's valuable.
Well, I mean, the bigger value, honestly, is taking that contract away. Like, regardless of whether or not they get the, like you're paying someone a first plus to take that contract.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I don't think that they will be prepared to make that gamble. So,
it's a big...
as I said to you, I think it'll end up being something with they'll go off and do something with Carolina. Yeah, and I think that's more likely because Carolina will probably give them something. I think Carolina will give them something of fair value for San Jose off the back of you kind of did us a bit of a solid in the Burns trade, and you facilitated that. We'll catch you up on the backside now and do something there. So they've got a really good working relationship, those two clubs. So why not? Have you got another one, or you want me to go with the next one because we've got a few more?
No, I think you can roll through.
Okay, so I think that the Bruins and the Dallas Stars would both like the same thing, which is the swimming pool from the movie Cocoon. In order to help keep Father Time at bay and make sure that aging doesn't take place.
Yeah, look, I think there's a bunch of teams that would love that.
Yeah, Dallas have become that team a little bit. I don't know with Dallas. It's the same, but something slightly off with them. Like they're still really, 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 really good, but it's just not. It doesn't look the same. So I don't quite know. For the Coyotes would like a title deed to a bit of land just outside Phoenix.
So what happened? Like they were hinting they were.
So the latest information is, remember we talked about, and I spoke to Leah Merrill about this, and I've spoken to her twice about the Coyotes now, obviously, from the PHNX Sports podcast. Go check them out, by the way. They've got really good, if you haven't listened to them, the PHNX Sports group are really good, and they've got a lot of information on this and the Alex Morello and what's going on with the deals there. But the belief is there is land that's sectioned in Phoenix, which can be seized by the government for public purposes.
Okay.
And the suggestion is that there's a plot of land just outside Phoenix towards Scottsdale, which has been earmarked to go to the Coyotes as the home of their new arena. So they haven't announced it yet because obviously they're still in the negotiations, but the suspicion is that they're going to get a bit of land just between Phoenix and Scottsdale, which honestly feels like the best possible spot. We talked about that idea. Yeah. You probably, for a lot of players, near Scottsdale's probably a good call.
Yeah.
And for the crowds, you probably want to be near Phoenix. So I think that would be a win-win for all sides, but they would very much like that deed to the.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're talking about undeveloped land, so we're still talking about several years away.
It's still 3 years.
Is there, but that's a big improvement from nothing.
Yeah, exactly. There's a couple of other teams here, like the Jets would like as well. They would like a time device as well, but they don't want the pool from Cocoon. They would like the remote from the Adam Sandler movie Click. Because they would like to freeze the standings.
Yeah.
Right now. Because I don't know about you. I don't think this is holding up.
No, I'd be shocked if they were still on top of the Central in a few weeks' time.
But if they could maybe get that, I think that would be absolutely fantastic. There's a couple of other clubs. I mean, the Montreal Canadiens would just like a French-speaking superstar. But what else is new? This has been their wish every year, and again, the tree remains empty. Apart from that, the Flyers again would also probably like the remote from Click, because there's no way they're staying there.
No. I mean, look, I think there's also a handful of teams, honestly, that would just like.
The Devils would like a redo
I think a lot of people want the back to tank from Star Wars. Like, there's so many rosters that are just banged up with significant players out. This season just feels like a constant injury ward of like teams with like 3-4 significant players out. That I just don't know who some of these teams are. They've had such bad injury luck that they're fighting their way back from the lower standings. We're looking at like teams like New Jersey and Colorado and a bunch of other kind of teams with significant players that have missed a bunch of time. I think if everyone got rested up over the Christmas break and we had some people come back in January and some of these teams looked like who they look like at the start of the season, we might see a bit of a different kind of bounce back.
I think the other one, and there's a few teams that would very much. There's a few. Oh no! Don't no, Tim. I'm not going to let you blame the officials. Detroit Red Wings not being fantastic. That's not the officials doing. That's very much a Detroit Red Wings problem. What I would say though is there's probably a lot of teams that would want this next thing, but I'm going to give it to the Buffalo Sabres.
Mm.
and it's a save.
Yeah. There's so
Buffalo
many
Sabres.
teams that would just like a fucking save.
The Buffalo Sabres, literally this year. So, I'm looking at, right? 16 games,
Yeah.
893
Yeah.
with a 3.17 against.
Yeah.
Then Eric Comrie, because remember, he's there now.
Mhm.
Eric Comrie is there right now. He has an 863 in 7 games with a 401. Right? And that's split by Devin Levi, who's had to come in occasionally because, nothing's working.
Well, I mean, look, the thing is, like, Levi started the season as like, oh, this guy will probably take over as the starter, and it just
14 games at 892.
Yeah, and it just didn't really work out. Like, I think that within a few games, they kind of started to realize, like, all right, maybe actually he wasn't as ready as we expected. He got sent down the AHL. He came back up. And then got immediately blown up in his first game back.
But this is the weird part. The weird part about the Devin Levi thing is that they sent him down to the Rochester Americans. He played 2 games.
Yeah.
He had 9-2-1 in 2 games. They instantly decided he was fixed.
Yeah.
That's not patience.
No, I mean, look, he's 21. I'm just hoping he doesn't get like that same Carter Hart treatment where, they decide they need to save their season and he, just gets ruined. Because
Carter Hart would like some bionic parts because he keeps breaking down. Like he'll have a really good run of games and then he gets hurt.
Mm.
So, but look, there's a lot of things out there. Feel free under this pod, if you come back and watch it later or listen to it later, put down what you think your team would like for Christmas. I think there's a lot of teams out there that would like a save, definitely. I think there's a lot of teams that would like a save. There's some teams that would like a new coach, a couple of teams that would like a new general manager. Toronto, apart from the depth scoring, I think would just like a new bottom 2 lines. That feels, and a cap that's 20 million bigger. Just saying that. Anyway, this has been the 200th episode. Thank you so much again, everyone. You told us at the start we'd be at 200. I don't think we would have believed you. But no, this has been so much fun, and we're looking forward. We've got a lot of things in planning. There's a lot of really cool ideas we've still got, and we're hoping to be able to bring them to you. So if you've got ideas as well, please let us know, because we like to sort of do different bits and pieces, not just sort of be the boring talking heads on here. But thank you, everyone, for 200. And here's to the next one. And we'll catch you all later. No matter what you celebrate, have fun.
Thanks all. Have a good holiday.
Whatever.